welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Now, Joel, last week you made me promise that we would not bring up and talk about manifestation for the next 2 months. And I'm honoring that. I even got Jen to honor that promise. We're going to do that. And today we're going to just kind of like be neighbors to the concept, but we're not actually going to go there. Is that okay?
I like how you did that, by the way. I really
okay.
I know where you're going with that, by the way.
Well, you should. You're the one who came up with the topic. So if you didn't know, we're in real trouble. But you introduced me to a term I hadn't heard before, the law of proximity. And I mean, is this a term you've known about for some time? Because I don't remember you ever mentioning it.
I just made that up.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, all right. So we're crediting Joel Elston with a new technological term, the law of proximity.
Let me also clarify. I made it up and then I typed it in to search for it, and other people have made it up too. So I clearly can't claim originality, but I truly did not know it existed. But years ago, I was watching the show, and it's humorous. It was about this small town in likely Utah. It fits the bill. And there is this school that the high school class was the senior class was 5 students.
Wow.
And they were talking about them going to school. There's only 5 students in the senior class. And one of the interesting things is they were talking to one of the young ladies, and she said, she was in love with one of her classmates and said, he's my soulmate. And I thought, well, that's convenient that your soulmate was in a class of 5. I thought, wow, that's pretty convenient. Yeah. And in reality, the other dude apparently he was gay. He said he was gay, and the other one wasn't interested. So I mean, basically, not only was the law of proximity, but there's only like one choice. But yet her perception was that's her soulmate. So the fact that she was in proximity to this person is where that connection developed. Now, if she's in a proximity of 100 other guys, would it be likely he's her soulmate? It's possible, but you see that. So one of the things I find interesting is people that will say, I want to do something. I want to create a situation. I want to attract things in my life. But yet they don't put themselves in proximity to that. I want to lose weight and get in shape, have a beach body by summer, but you don't put yourself in the proximity of the gym or something similar to it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so whether it's networking for business or whatever, one of the things I always encourage people to do if you want to break into a new field is find every field has conferences. Every field has things that you can go to several conferences, hang out with those people, find out what they're doing, find the terms and the lingo that they use, be in the proximity of those people. You have a much better chance of first of all, learning that and then attracting the skills necessary to do whatever new thing you want to do, because you'll know the pathway to do it. So no matter where you are, you can want whatever you want, but you have to be in some reasonable proximity of that. If that makes any sense. So
it does make sense, yes. And I like your business example primarily because it's not a typical business example. The typical business example is here's where you go and amazing things happen where you start getting your new customers.
Right.
But that's not what the example was. The example was just connecting with other people who do the same kind of thing you're doing.
Yes. And that I'm a very big, we discussed the value of networking in general. I have a network. I have contacts, over 7,000 contacts in the various places I have.
God, wow.
I don't actively know some of those contacts. They're there, and I have a note by what they do. So if a client moves to California and says, do you know a psychiatrist in Glendale, California? I think that's what she said it was. I said, let me check. Sure enough, I said, I don't know the psychiatrist directly, but I met him once. We met at a conference. So she took the referral. The guy remembered the conference and gave her an appointment. He was backed up and said, I'll give you an appointment since Joel referred you. So that network connection from a few years before allowed my client to have access, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but in today's world, getting an appointment with a psychiatrist is a pretty big deal, especially a good one. So that worked out really well for her. So the placing myself amongst people, but also connecting, gathering information, being there is how you move forward. If you want to break into an industry, something you never did before, being at their conference, being at where the gathering of the best are taking place, you'll get so much more knowledge than taking a course. I'm not saying you won't have to eventually take a course,
Sure.
but you'll learn about more. What is the best course? What did these people do? What was their path? Who's the most successful of that group? Find out what they did instead of randomly doing. By putting yourself in proximity of like-minded people or people that have what you want, you create that better connection to best attract more and more and more. So it applies no matter where. If we talked about the ineffectiveness, in my opinion, ineffective of dating apps, because you're not in the actual proximity of the person you're dating, so you don't get 90% of the stuff you're after in a relationship. Right. So it's a concept, and as I'm editing down my book, The Law of Action, I kept finding the word proximity popping up. So so that's when I sort of realized being in the proximity, like some of my dear friends. I live in Virginia, and I moved here in 2008, and I moved here for what I thought was about a 5-year run, and turns out it's a little longer than that at this point.
Just a bit,
yeah. So when I moved up here, I didn't know a single person, but when I moved, I moved to a rental home first, and I bought a house in this neighborhood that I just recently left. Well, so many of my dear friends were there. We never would have met if I weren't living next to these people. I mean, these are, like I said, just some of my family friends are like family to me now, because they were in my proximity. If I were moving if I lived where I'm living now, I never really would have met those people. And as important as they are to me now, the idea or suggestion that the chain of events that led us to be friends wouldn't have taken place.
There's also something that you touched on, but you haven't really honed in on. And I want to hone in on it for a second, because not only did you put yourself in proximity for that, and for other things, like you mentioned, going to conferences and so forth, not only did you do networking where you meet new people, preferably people in the same kind of field, so you can learn stuff from them, or, that kind of thing, but you kept records. I mean, you could actually tell us there are 7,000 people in your circle. And the fact that you can tell me that is what blew me away. Like, wow. Most people don't keep those kinds of records, and that's really, that's impressive, but it's also a life lesson.
Also, and I want to be very clear that to my people who are very organized, my records simply say medical doctor, psychiatrist. I don't get into deep descriptives of them. I just want to know what they do. Okay, so don't think Joel is really that efficient. Let's be clear.
You're a lot more efficient than most are, honestly.
So like when I meet people and let's exchange contact information, they have, they'll usually put Joel Elston, life coach guy or whatever. And I will put, just financial broker, met through so-and-so or whatever. That way, anytime something comes up, and I will say probably, to be fair, 50% of those 7,000 contacts I met once and had no interaction since then.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not overselling it, but if something does come up, I can just, how you can search in your iPhone and contacts, or even my computer where I have some of the contacts. I can search, like, I need a doctor in California, or I need something, and I can get a list of that stuff. Or I need, I have one of the more bizarre ones down in Florida. I met a guy while I was down there, and he does a boat detailing and auto detailing business down there. He's really successful. So we met. We were at my favorite hamburger place, and he was talking about, we knew some people together, and I said, man, if you're ever up in Richmond, let me know. He said, next time you're down, I'll take you out on my boat. I said, great. So we exchanged information. So I just thought that was just a casual type thing when I'd be down there next time. So later, a friend of mine who lives not far from Emery Island, just in Bradenton, just right off the island, had a brand new, whatever he bought, really expensive car, and he wanted someone who did ceramic coating for that. And so I said, well, I don't know if he does this, but here's the guy. Well, instant hit, instant connection. And the guy texted me back and goes, wow, I didn't ever expect this kind of referral. And that's a very expensive process. I'm sure he makes a lot of money. Sure. he was super happy to do it. I laughed. I said, that's one of the most random, because it's not my wheelhouse, but
Right.
even there it was available.
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably the first thing that grabs my attention when I think about that practice of yours to collect that information. And yes, I get it. It's very surface level information. You're not going in depth in any way. But there are two pieces that jump out at me. The first piece is you really find those contacts to be valuable. And I can't honestly say that I've ever thought of it that way. And I suspect a lot of people haven't thought about it that way, but you really found them to be valuable, even though there's somebody, like you said, half of you maybe met once, you really don't know anything more about them than that. Although I'm guessing that when you did meet them, they made some sort of impression on you, so you had some sense of them.
And everybody that I met, I at least had a conversation with. There was something going on that made them feel relevant to me. It's that's a really important thing. There had to be something in that conversation that I just wanted to record that, and the contacts themselves are valuable, but the note of what they do is super valuable to them and me. And how I got into private practice, you were a front row seat to that when I was doing that. My dear friend, Dr. Master, who passed away in 2017, he set me up with the office and some connections, but I went and introduced myself to every therapist and every doctor in Richmond, and told them what I was doing. Had my business card, had a little sad brochure I made up, and I never, after that, that's the last time I ever had to do that, just one time. And those connections, they're still valuable. I met hundreds, if not thousands, of connections off of those original connections. It's just, it's an amazing thing. And in Richmond, again, I'm not trying to be arrogant or claim more fame or anything like that, but I'm pretty well known for what I do. And that connection, one client refers to another, and I'm usually pretty full, but if someone is referred by a client, they get to the top of the list. Because I want to make sure anybody that takes the time to refer me gets, those people get top priority in me scheduling. And that's how I treat them valuable, not only for me, but I want to be of value to them as well.
So on the topic of proximity, you're hammering in really on key reasons why the proximity, or in this case, a particular form of proximity, the exchanging of contact information.
Yes.
Why that proximity is so important. And you've hit a number of key points here. One, the referral value.
Yes.
And I'd be willing to bet that referral value works both ways. That it's not
Absolutely.
just one-sided, right?
Absolutely.
And you gave us one example. I'm willing to bet that, well, actually, I know this because of your experience that you've told us previously, even years ago when we first started talking about this, about how your practice filled up so quickly. This is actually the first time I realized that you went to talk to all the therapists in the area.
Yes.
Well, that's a really important piece. Wow, that's huge.
The first week, and not everybody saw me, of course, but and the reason I mentioned Dr. Master was the most, well-known psychiatrist in addiction medicine, really in the East Coast of the United States, but in Richmond, everybody knew him. So, but people, me connecting myself, I work with Dr. Master, which he certainly would verify. That opened up doors that never would have opened for me. So my original being in the law of proximity with Dr. Master, when I met him at Williamsville Wellness, that's the place I ran before, is what led me to him after that was over, going to his office. And his name, he didn't go call anybody. I just went and knocked on doors. Well, this is Sherman Master's friend. So they took my card and information, and that's what started it all.
That's really something. I don't know if you realize this, but the process that you followed is a process that's top level sales courses and courses of study and seminars and workshops and so forth. The idea of what they often call it is going to the center of influence and then working from that center of influence. In this case, the center of influence for you was Dr. Master.
Right.
And that your whole experience demonstrates just how powerful that whole thing is. Not just for sales, but for anything that you're doing. I mean, that's a really powerful process.
Well, it really is. And while Dr. Master was a dear friend and he was my mentor, he was someone who, when not everybody gets to meet Dr. Master, So in the concept that I come up here, he's working at a company. I came up here to work for. He wasn't there that long because he got tired of the silliness himself and he left. But the idea that we made that deep connection at that point, it just, until he passed away, he was one of my closest friends, still one of my closest friends, the way I look at it. And he, just that name opened the door. And then, there's a level, especially when you start out business. I went and got every certification a human being could possibly get at the beginning, and studied.
And you still do.
Still do, yeah. Now I just do it because I like it. It's not what I don't even list them anymore. Yeah, but I needed to establish some credibility. But beyond my certifications, and there were many, was the fact that when Dr. Master is attached to a name, there's automatic credibility attached. So I brought, he would never allow me or allow anyone to use his name unless they didn't believe in their process and how they be. So I didn't get a lot of questions. I was accepted pretty quickly by, medical doctors and therapists because, again, Dr. Master must say it must be good. I didn't have to use, I was the first life coach in Richmond, as far as I know. And the idea that was just an immediately accepted thing. The center of influence, as you pointed out, is it began there. And that took place because of the law of proximity. I never would have met him unless it was under those exact circumstances for that short period of time.
So now that we were seeing a really great example, and we've talked about a few other examples too, about how the law of proximity is so important. Let's kind of spread it out a little bit. Let's expand the range to other areas of life. So one of the first ones that comes to my mind is you work a lot with people who are either dealing with money issues or something related to a money issue. And I wonder if you can kind of like just lay out some examples of how proximity has helped people that you've worked with perhaps to change their situation.
Well, often people inherit money behaviors, generationally it's passed down, poverty or spending, and a lot of things go along with that. When somebody comes to me with one of their main factors, as being money, not only do I obviously talk about the law of attraction, but being around people who are good with money, being around people who understand that, like who are you, we have multiple examples of this, but here's an example of a recent one. So this guy comes to me. He's actually a pretty well-known, has a mechanic store here in town. He's very, very successful, well-known. He's terrible with money. And he makes a lot of money, but he spends a lot of money. So he's like, I want to attract more money. And I'm looking at all the money he's got. So you're attracting a boatload of money, but you're also getting rid of it as soon as you attract it. And I'm all about abundance and buying whatever you want to buy, but also you got to have the mindset of, I want to have an abundance, so you don't just waste money either. And so we were talking, and everybody in his family generationally, except his brother, was a spendthrift. They all had several declared bankruptcy. His father declared bankruptcy, his mother declared bankruptcy. They had a bunch of debt. I said, what happened to your brother? And he said, well, he's a little estranged from the family. Him and I aren't estranged, but he sort of got away, and he is wildly successful, and he invests his money, and he does, he has his own business. And I said, so here's an idea. Since you're not estranged from your brother, why don't you go hang out with your brother for a while and see what he does?
Okay.
And so and so he did, and they came back and reported. He said, well, he said, I took notes. Here's what he does, and everything his brother was doing is what I would recommend. And I said, well, that's basically what I've done. So you have now two people that have done it this way. Explain to me why you wouldn't do it. You have 100 examples of those who've done it the other way, but they all end in the same position you are. So he then started seeking out other people, friends that, like he has a friend that never buys a new car. He always buys a used car. He's very successful, but he just has his way of doing things. So that was another friend. So he eventually created a sort of a mini mastermind group that I like to point out what he didn't know what he's doing, but he created that, mainly dealing with, so he shifted what mattered. Without changing drastic lifestyle, he quit wasting so much money. Then he started investing it properly. And then, now he's doing really well with it. And once he paid off his credit card debts, if you have, by the way, if you have $10,000 or $100,000 worth of credit card debt and you're paying 18% interest, there's no investment better than paying the credit card debt down, because you're making 18% of your money when you do that.
Absolutely right.
And if you can find 18%, you won. That's a surefire way to make 18%. So he did that, and so putting yourself in the proximity of people who are living a life like you want. When I went to Gamblers Anonymous the very first time, that was a zoo, and I was looking around, and everybody that was talking was just talking about the horrors of their gambling from years ago and how miserable they were, and how they were just saying things. I was like, if that's recovery, I don't want it. I remember thinking, but there's one guy that talked about, he mentioned, he said apparently he had a really bad past. He eventually became my sponsor. I really like this guy. But he just made a brief statement but he talked about the benefits of his recovery, the success, not having the pressure of and he was talking about what I wanted. And the other people were talking about their horror stories and how much money they lost and their terrible gambling stories. I already had that. I wanted something I didn't have. So I put myself in proximity of him. He was my sponsor. We used to go to meetings together. That was a big influence on how I saw Gamblers Anonymous, at least that one. And when I go to meetings, I'll only pick out those people that are talking. When I go to a meeting, I have 30 years clean from gambling. 30 years clean. So a newcomer doesn't want to hear, oh, Joel's got 30 years clean. It was really bad. He don't want to hear my war story. He wants to hear, how did you go from homelessness, jail, to being you today? That's what they want to hear. So I want to deliver that message. So being in proximity of me at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting would give, not everybody's doing that. Most of the people are still stuck on, well, I gambled so bad and I had to do this. And it's like, yeah, it's terrible, but you got to quit telling the story as it was and tell the story of now.
Do you think that's one of the main reasons that you've shared with us that people who just do the 12-step programs, I'm not talking about people who do other, therapy or whatever, I'm just people who just do the 12-step have such a low success rate? Is that because of what?
Yeah, I think it's a major factor. Some of the outdated concepts. Like if you're 19 years old and you go to Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, one of the first things they say is, you can never ever drink again. Well, telling a 19-year-old they can't have a beer ever again is not going to be, they're going to laugh at that concept, because now, would they be open to the idea that they need to stop drinking for a little while? They usually are, but you can't tell them for the next 60 years you can't have a beer. So there's a lot of things going on in that, and plus just hearing the same stories of misery over and over. I know people that were in Gamblers Anonymous. I got kicked out of a meeting one time.
Really?
Yeah, because of course, me. So there's this guy that he was telling this story. He pulled up in a really nice new Cadillac, and obviously he's having a pretty good life. He goes, I haven't gambled in 10 years, and by the grace of God, I hope I don't ever gamble again. But I'm in this meeting tonight, and I'm just as miserable as I've ever been. So, and you can allow comments. And I said, have you considered going back to gambling? It sounded more fun.
Well, now we know why you got kicked out of the meeting.
Yeah, really. But I really didn't want to go back to gambling, but I was trying to make a point. You think you're helping the 30 people in the room by saying you're going to be just as miserable 30 years, 10 years or whatever that time was into it? You're not. You're having the reverse effect. You're telling people it's not worth it. I'm still miserable. So the meetings are full of that, that negativity, and addiction is very seldom positive in the beginning, obviously.
Sure.
But people are looking for someone who did it. They overcame it. They just blew past it. And my story gets pretty dark and deep. And so when people find out, my gosh, that happened and this happened. Yeah. And there's a lot of those out there. So that's the problem with, I think, 12-step meetings is you're in the proximity of generally negative-minded people. They're not bad people. They were just they follow the script. When they arrive, they just tell the war stories often. Obviously, there's some really good meetings out there, and those aren't the meetings I'm referring to.
Sure.
But those initial meetings,
you wouldn't have been kicked out of those meetings anyway.
What's that?
You wouldn't have been kicked out of those meetings anyway.
No, they'd all laugh at that one. That one was just, but you can't tell somebody I've been doing this for X number of years. in real life. And by the way, his life wasn't miserable. He just thought that was the story he had to tell, I believe, and
Yeah.
you get stuck in who can tell the biggest story, who has the worst story. And I always tell people, you know what the worst addiction is? Your addiction. That's what the worst addiction is. Whatever it is, it's your addiction, because that's affecting you.
Yeah. It reminds me of it was kind of a game that was played for a short time when I was a kid. And I think it was actually based on a comedy routine, because you did it kind of like a comedy routine. And the way it would go is like this, one person would say, well, we're so poor that we couldn't even afford to have dinner on Sunday. And the other person would say, you had dinner on Monday through Saturday? Oh man, that's nothing. We were so poor that and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. No, that's what they do, sort of. There's several examples of that. So at least for me, I actually avoided the 12-step meetings when I was able to. And when I was in the sober living home, I had to follow those rules and go. But after I was done with that, now I still do obviously plenty of quote unquote therapy. I literally talk to people for 40 hours a week about stuff. I have my friends that we have meetings, kind of stuff for our version of meeting. So it isn't that I'm not addressing things, but I have to be, my rule, if I have the group that I meet with are all like-minded people, law of attraction, positive, let's look at where we are. Let's look at what we got. Let's not suffer and continually suffer from the things that happened 20 years ago. They're done. We have a new version of life. The past only has the power we allow it. And getting stuck in that just decompensation of discussion about, oh, well, I remember how miserable it was. I ate out of the trash can. It was sad. And it was. But certainly, I don't want to live in that energy for an eighth of a second. I know it existed. I tell the story because it helps punctuate. I don't stay there. I'm there for about an eighth of a second and I move on.
Right. Exactly. You don't stay there. That's the big lesson there. I know from my own experience that the importance of surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded is very high. It's a very high level of importance.
Yes.
And one of the benefits that comes out of it is that even if what you're aiming to connect to is not exactly where you want to be, but it's better than where you have been.
Yes.
It's interesting how that creates sort of to use the Abraham term, a vortex. It has a sucking effect. It kind of sucks you over to the area you really want to be in, almost without realizing it. And I think a large portion of it is what we're talking about here, this proximity idea, particularly proximity to the kind of people that you really want to have in your life.
Right. Yeah.
And it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Well, you have to do it like one step at a time and one person at a time. And, this person's better and I'm going to go a little bit more with them and so on and so forth. But you get there.
When you get there, you're absolutely right. And this is where the law of proximity, the law of attraction can have merging effects. So when you get the law of proximity, you're around people, you like-minded people, then you keep being drawn to like-minded people because the gravity of that, or the vortex of that sucking energy you're talking about that pulls it all together. The foundation of the law of proximity eventually makes the connection to the law of attraction, which draws everybody to you or you to them. And that happens all the time. And sitting down, I think I shared this one time on the show. I have a friend was having dating problems and apps didn't work for him. He was a doctor, ER doctor, and never had off. And so there was a talk that we were going to, and it was a very boring talk to most people, but it was like neuroscience involved and all that. And of course, I'm being the nerd I am, I was all excited. So
sure.
I talked to him about going. He said, I don't know, that sounds boring. I go, just go. And so we get there, and he's on the way there. Like, I guess I'm just going to be single the rest of my life. And I'm really tired of him saying all that. Go, yep, you are. Forget it. You're done. And just quit talking about it. Let's go. And so he laughed. We go in there. So when we get there, these were assigned seats. We have really good seats. So he sits down, and there's this really nice lady sitting next to him. And I sit down, and he doesn't even notice her. And so I basically reached her and said, hey, I'm Joel. It's nice to meet you. And she goes, "Oh, I'm so and so. I'm a med student, pre-med. I'm in residency now,
Okay.
and over at so and so." And I said, "This is my friend who obviously doesn't have a tongue right now," and I introduced him and all that stuff. And he's like, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And so she said, "Are you into neuroscience?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I really am." I said, "Particularly as it relates, I'm a life coach." And she goes, "Oh my God, I think I've heard of you." And so we started that.
Okay.
And then he's joining the conversation. I got those two talking, and I leaned in and said, "I got to go take this call real quick. I'll be right back." I didn't have a call, but I just got out of there.
Right.
And I sat behind them. They didn't see me. They talked the entire time.
Wow.
And so I put him in I didn't know she'd be there, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the law of attraction in play. But I
Right.
put him in her proximity. He was a little silly that he couldn't see that himself, but I had to sort of fuel the conversation, and I got out of there. Well, they're still dating. They're doing great. They're probably
wow. Good for them.
Because neither one of them were going to work on the apps. You're not in residence. You have no life. There's nothing you can do. You work.
You're a doctor. That's it.
That's it. And he's an ER doctor that works overnight, so their schedules weirdly unite.
Okay.
They are fascinated in the same things, but he would have never met her she's never even really even understood the app. She isn't on the apps. And she just was there. She said, "I've never thought I'd find somebody at a neuroscience discussion." And I said, "Yeah." And so I've had dinner with them a couple of times. They're great people. And that took place because they were sitting by each other. Again, you can look at the sort of the synchronicity of that, but also being aware that I am now in the proximity of the people that I want to be with. So if I want to go out on a date, or I want to meet somebody new to date, I need to be in places where people have like-minded concepts for me. I need to be in the proximity of them, because there's like very few women that are ever going to deal with this weird brain unless they had the same things, right? So finding somebody, being in the proximity of people that have the same connection, saves a lot of time, because if you're at that conference, you're pretty much going to be in my wheelhouse.
And the fact that it was a neuroscience conference, which for like your friend said, I mean, even for people within the medical industry, for most of them, the ones who aren't into neuroscience, that's a pretty boring topic for them. And for somebody who's not medicine, for most of them, it's going to be a boring topic too. This is not something that's going to attract the masses. Otherwise, it'd be filling up, right?
Yeah, nobody wants to go to those.
Right. So the point is, an event like that, it may be the last thing you think about in terms of meeting somebody.
Yes.
But events like that are places to meet people.
Yes.
And the reason I differentiate like that, you can also kind of get into the wrong mindset that says, well, I'm going to go there to meet the love of my life. And that's going to backfire completely.
That doesn't work either.
Right. It has to be about meeting people, and about meeting people who are like-minded or have some similarity or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Yes.
And that similarity thing is really what makes the law of proximity work, isn't it? I mean, the fact that there's a similarity going on is what not only brings you all together, but it also is what gets like the referral process going, or it gets the connection process going. It gets all that kind of stuff going. Yeah,
just that young couple in high school, that the two people that their soulmates were there.
Right.
I don't know how to get hold of them, but that's been like 10 years ago I saw that show. I wanted to know what happened,
Yeah, right. I'm not usually into what they call real TV, or that kind of thing, reality TV. But that one, reality TV, that one I'd actually watch. That'd be interesting.
That would be cool. So, but as we're saying, so how it applies to anything, friends that get stuck in the dating pool, it works really well for that. They get stuck and I can't date, but you're not where the people you want to be. Like, so one of my clients she had a really rough relationship. Her ex-husband was a severe alcoholic. She's still very young. And so one of her main things is she wants someone who doesn't drink or is in recovery to start dating again. She said, I can't handle somebody. So that's one of her things. But yet her friends would talk her, and she doesn't drink either, but her friends would still talk her into going out to bars and doing stuff. And I go, so what do you guys think's going to happen there? What, how many guys are there? I said, there is a chance that the designated driver doesn't drink and he meets you. Other than that, people are generally going to these clubs to basically get drunk and have fun. That's what they're trying to do. So where would you meet people outside of that? I don't want you to go troll AA meetings. That's not good. That's not really acceptable use of AA meetings. But beyond that, we're people that are healthy. Maybe the gym. There's there's cycling clubs here in town. There's a walking club. There's a show dog club. There's all these clubs.
Right.
And so the people who generally follow a healthier lifestyle will have more aware of that. So just put yourself in there. So she started finding various places where they go. So she met this guy at a cooking class one time, and totally, this goes to your point, she was not going there to meet him.
Right.
She was just meeting people. And so they were by each other. They had this cooking class where they each had their own little area. They were preparing the meal. Well, one of the ingredients was wine in the meal. So the guy asked, will the alcohol be good? And he goes, yeah, the alcohol's absorbed. It's burned off. So it's just for flavoring. So don't worry about that. He goes, well, that's good because I don't drink. Well, she looked over going, wow.
Okay.
And she said, I don't drink either. That's a good question. I was going to ask that same question. And they just started helping each other and talking. And it turns out he had almost an identical story. The woman he was going to marry had a severe hidden alcohol problem.
Wow.
Fortunately, he didn't marry her. She was able to get help. I hope that worked out. But he was there. Look, he didn't go there to meet anybody. He just likes to cook. But being open-minded to the concept, they started dating.
Yeah.
And, because you went to a cooking class. That's not necessarily no alcohol there concept, but the fact that question was asked, you put yourself there, that question connected them.
And as a reminder, as much as we like telling stories like that because they're fun stories, that's not the experience when you go to most of these things.
Not at all. If you go with the expectation of being that definitely won't be your experience.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I remember, and you'll remember too, shortly after, actually, I'm not sure if I told you about this. Shortly after my divorce, I went to a Super Bowl party because I got divorced at the beginning of February. So the Super Bowl came right after that. And basically went there just because, well, I got to start getting back out in the world. That seems like a good place to go. I didn't know anybody there, and walked in and got greeted by the hostess, who was really very friendly, very nice, and introduced me to somebody who was standing right there, very short woman, very, very nice woman. And we ended up talking the entire night. Now, are we dating? No, we're not dating at all. We actually probably would be really bad for each other as a couple, but we're great friends. So because I was willing to go to an event like that and not particularly look for a dating situation, it didn't really matter that I didn't end up with one, because I ended up with a friend who, literally, we talk on the phone just about every week, and we share all kinds of stuff. I actually helped her avoid a scammer who almost got into her account.
I think what you're realizing as you're talking about it, the last thing you needed to do a few weeks after your divorce was fix. You didn't need that at that point. What you needed was I know how difficult that was for you. That's a very difficult time for you.
Oh,
and, the idea that you weren't healed enough, in my opinion, I'm not trying to.
No, that's a fair assumption.
Yeah. So what you really needed was that friend. That's what
I just need to get out and meet people.
You needed. I'm so glad you went, and that connection is super valuable. It's the only connection you needed at that point. You really needed that at that point. So it worked perfectly. So whether you manifested it or not, whether you intended to or not, you attracted exactly what you needed.
Yes. And by the way, I didn't actually meet the other people at the Super Bowl party.
Yeah.
I literally spent the entire time talking to this one woman. Yeah. That was it, and we had a great time. It was wonderful. And when I walked away from it, I said, I never really introduced myself to the others. And you know what? I really didn't need to.
I believe you weren't intended to meet the others. It didn't matter. They weren't there to matter.
Pretty much. Yeah. I think that's definitely true.
But when I look at that story, that's the universe giving you exactly what you needed at that point. Exactly.
Yes.
The idea that last thing you needed was getting a relationship.
I really didn't need
yeah,
that at
she's
all.
probably not even your type, but she's an incredible friend. You're a very good friend with her, and that's that's very valuable. So when you're doing this, your expectation of it is to meet people, is to network, is to put yourself in the proximity of people that are like-minded, people that think like you, people that have the goals, the people that are driven like you. I can't be around negative energy very long. It's I've had many examples we shared when somebody, I don't try to convince anybody about the law of attraction anymore. I don't. If people ask me about it, I'll be glad to share. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to tell you why it's right. I have right now many, many years of it working perfectly in my life. I don't need to sell you on it. And I'll tell you how I use it, but I'm not going to debate the concepts with you because I tried too hard to use it and it wasn't effective when I was trying too hard to use it. Now I just sort of like, whatever, and I do it. And so that's hard to explain to somebody too,
Well, I can share something that's equally hard to explain, because I recall when I was first exposed to the whole idea of law of attraction, I remember asking myself, well, what do I do if I encounter somebody who doesn't believe in it? And it was a real fear of mine at that time. It's one of the reasons why I started the podcast, among others, and how I met you, which was a wonderful thing. Well, there's another example of proximity because we also lived within a short distance of each other at that time.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry. No apology necessary at all. But the reason I mentioned this is that despite the fact that the people who come into our lives have different interests, different perceptions, and so forth, the thing that has played out over and over for me is the one thing I thought could never happen. And yet it was the one thing that I need the most. And the one thing, touching on your point that you raised, and the one thing that I really wanted to believe, but I just couldn't believe, which was that everybody would believe in the law of attraction. I literally couldn't believe that. And to this day, I still can't really believe it. But You know what has happened? I can't remember the last time I met somebody who wanted to know about the podcast, because I often mentioned that I do this podcast, and wanted to know what it was about. I told them, and they said, I think it's a bunch of bullshit. Yeah. I can't remember that ever happening. Not even once. And when I started this show, if I had proposed that idea to myself, I would have thought that was ludicrous.
Yeah.
But exactly the opposite of what I expected happened. And it happened because I put myself into a mindset, into a focus, talking to people like yourself who were the vibrational equivalent, who were vibrationally where I wanted to be. And sure enough, that's what I've attracted in my life every time, over and over again. I mean, you tell me stories about people you encounter who are fighting it. And I say, wow, I'm not used to that. Tell me the story.
well, no, in my the way I meet a lot of people, they're clients, so they're coming to me on a different vibrational level.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
So when they say, I've had a couple of clients say, "Look, that's crazy as hell." It is, it is. It's wacky, and I don't sell it. I just simply, they said, what changed? If you ask me what changed my life more than anything else, there's two things that changed my life.
Okay.
In my recovery. First of all, you know how dedicated I am to working out in the gym. That saved my sanity. That allowed me to live. Right. And I'm adamant that was the first process. Mm-hmm. The second was the law of attraction, which changed everything. And I would never got to the law of attraction if I weren't working out. I'd probably already be dead at that point. But so my addiction, I used exercise in the beginning. Then when I discovered the law of attraction, how to change the perspective, because I was in recovery, but life was not going well. I was still very negative thinking. I always had bare minimum, but I never thought I'd have more than bare minimum. Mm-hmm. And in any area of my life. And then once I got law of attraction, and it started, working, and it worked as fast as I would allow it to work, if that makes any sense. It could only work at the speed that I would allow it. And I didn't think anything.
Which is what we all do.
Yeah. And so it's instant, but very few people are able to handle instant. So they don't believe it works, so it doesn't work. But most people accept incrementally, it will work. So, I have every now and then I'll get some weird comment on my Facebook post or whatever about people that, you don't understand. You're a victim blamer. You're this or that. It doesn't work. You're full of shit. And I don't have to defend it. I tell you, and I tell you, I'm not, I appreciate the large dollars I make for being on this podcast, which is none. I do it because I love it. And I love you. We're friends and I love
Absolutely.
our interaction. But the reality is, I'm not saying this to impress anybody or try to get them to believe it. I don't care if I really don't. It doesn't affect me. But if you ask me what is my belief system and how does it play, the law of attraction is it. It's factual.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's tie proximity in, because that's the topic we decided to
Sure.
attack today. The proximity, first of all, you pointed out something that I kind of skipped over, because there really were people who were in the outer edges of my circle who I would encounter who did not believe in it. And it was always online, and it was always in a group with somebody who I had no connection to, and they had posted something randomly and I'd respond to it. Those were the situations in which I would encounter it. I would never encounter it in any situation where I met somebody in person. That never happened.
That's fair.
But through social media, yeah, you're right. There are times when I would encounter that kind of thing. So there's an example of proximity. I mean, I think it's safe to say that other than not knowing or encountering somebody at all, meeting somebody on social media is probably as close as you're going to get to not meeting somebody at all. I mean, it's about as far out, the furthest edge of somebody that you're going to possibly meet. Probably not the most ideal form of proximity that we're referring to.
Exactly. And that's that's sort of, it is in proximity, but it's sort of the opposite of what we're seeking.
Yes.
I mentioned before that I used to belong to like 15 different law of attraction Facebook groups. They're the worst place in the world. No disrespect.
It's ridiculous.
They're terrible. It's like, oh my gosh, they're arguing over the most. They're literally doing the opposite what we're trying to talk about.
Very often.
And so I had to get out of those groups because they were so incredibly negative and had so much argument. Like, it was wild to watch. So yes, it's one of those factors you got to look at. It isn't just proximity. You can be in the wrong proximity. That's sort of the point. The proximity, it again doesn't have emotion. If you go hang out with a bunch of drug addicts and pot smokers, that's not a bad thing per se, but hang out with people who aren't living a lifestyle that you want to live, you're going to still be involved. Your proximity to those people and that lifestyle will rub off on you.
I remember when I was in my 20s, I shook everything off: drugs, alcohol, everything. I shook it all off at once, and I did something that I didn't realize for years was a key piece of it. That because I succeeded, I succeeded where other people had not succeeded. And I thought it was pretty easy. I didn't understand why it was so difficult. Now I understand a lot more about why people would find it to be difficult. And this one thing that I did was a lot more important than I realized. I literally changed my circle of friends. The people I hung out with, I just stopped hanging out with them and started developing a new circle. Now, let me be very precise here. We're not talking a circle. We're talking about a circle about this big.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I changed that circle. I said, I know if I go hang out with them, I'm just going to keep drugging and alcoholing and all that kind of stuff. I have to change the circle. And so I did. I had no idea it was the best thing I could do. None whatsoever. But it was.
Well, that's the ultimate is, when I had a client a long time ago. I worked at this this facility that Dr. Master was involved with, and I would run groups from them occasionally. This was not my normal clientele. My clientele are usually upper middle class kids, that kind of thing, professional athletes, and a lot of stuff like that. Even though I meet with all kinds, that's my main group. So I was dealing with a lot of heroin addicts, and that's not normally who I treat. I might treat them on the back end, but not certainly in the middle of it, because that's a very complicated process. So there was this young gentleman there. I really liked him. He after he would always show up at my groups. He said, man, he said, your groups are so different than everybody else's. You talk about the right stuff. And so he said how much he couldn't afford to see me in person. But I said, well, we're at the groups. And so he described the situation. He got out of treatment. He was clean. And the area he lived in, everybody did heroin. Everybody. That's not an exaggeration. It's just, that's where he lived. And
Right.
a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. That's how some places are.
They are.
And he said, there's dealers outside my door. These are just, that's what takes place in my neighborhood. And he said, that's why I have such a hard time with recovery. I'm constantly around it.
Yeah.
And I told him one time, I said, look, I really like you. I said, I'll be honest with you. I'd leave our group hoping you're alive the next group. And I said, I mean that not to be negative, but just to say, is there any way you can move? And he goes, Joel, we can't. It's just not possible. I have no other place to be. And about 2 weeks after I told him that conversation, he didn't show up. And he did die. And he was in the proximity he was a good man, a very good man. He loved his family. He had a horrible addiction. If he could have gotten out of that area, and he would have had a much better shot. But as you're saying, he was forced in the proximity of his drug. And, imagine coming home from a rough day at work and you've been fighting this craving, you've been doing well. And this guy just gives you an Oxycontin, just says, don't even pay me, he's here. And he's right back on that. And he got a hold of a bad pill. Apparently he died of a fentanyl overdose, and a good man died. And the proximity that he was stuck in and could not find a way out of it. At one point I said, find a place, I'll help you. I'll do something. We'll find something. You gotta get out of there. It's just, and he was also mentally stuck in the proximity of that too. He didn't really see there was another way out. And it cost him his life. So the law of proximity, it happens. It is, when I say that, it's just like the law of attraction. Law of attraction is not positive by itself. It just is. The law of proximity operates the same function. It's you can go be in the proximity of the wrong people and have it affect you equally as negatively.
And I love the example. I mean, I'm very sad for the man that he wasn't able to make the change and that it cost him his life. But I love the example because I love the illustration that it creates about how important it is to make the change when it seems impossible to make the change.
Yes.
Because that's what it seemed to him. I mean, quite honestly, it's very clear from the story that you told, he really believed it was impossible.
He did.
And that's when it's the hardest to believe that we always have a choice. I mean, he thought he didn't have a choice. He thought he had no choice at all.
Right.
But he actually did have a choice. Let's just touch on that piece as our final discussion for this overall topic of the law of proximity. When we're faced with a situation where it seems like there is no way out, somehow we have to make that choice to believe that there's a way out, even if we don't know what it is.
And that's the I forget whoever said the quote. When you tried everything possible, remember you have it. I don't know who that was. It's a good quote. But the idea that there's always, you need to be able to. He was this guy that we're talking about, and if he would have, like he was changing his proximity, he would come to these meetings where I was at. He would specifically, and my meetings were generally always booked up, and I always made sure he had a seat. You know what I mean? No matter what, he had a seat. And he always would sit by me, and everybody used to kid, you're the teacher's pet. They used to laugh at him. He said, yes, I am. Thank God. But so he was changing, but like you're saying, when your overall belief is that something is not changing, it can't change, it's impossible, you're actually creating that within the law of attraction that we're talking about. Right. It wasn't changeable because he believed it wasn't changeable. That. And so if I would have had more time with him, I like to think I could have guided him to understand that. If you're going to pack everybody up and go move in with your grandmother who lives out in the country, let's figure out how to do that. Whatever it takes, because you're in a fatal situation. It's a matter of time before this gets you.
I'm curious to know what your take is on what I'm about to say. I really believe that the way to make a choice when there seems to be no choice is to say, I have no idea how to do this, but I'm going to choose this other alternative. I can't see how to get there, but I just choose it anyway.
I had that. That's my turning point in my life. I sat down in Florida deciding, am I going to put this bullet in my head, or am I going to go get this, go face all the stuff I have to face? I didn't even know what that meant. I had to make a decision. But once I did, the next step was obvious every time. The whole path was never laid out, but the next step kept being obvious.
That's hard to believe when you're faced with the feeling that you have no choice. Yep. It's hard to believe that if you just put yourself for a moment in the idea that, yes, this can happen, even though I don't have a clue how it can possibly happen. The idea that if you do that, you're going to have an obvious next step seems ludicrous.
Now, I didn't understand I'd have it. In real time, I didn't have the faith there was. I just knew after about 3 hours sitting on the bench deciding, pull the trigger or go do this. All I got to was go do this. That's I didn't have any other steps. Yeah. It's just an opportunity of me having a place to live in a transitional living sober home became available. And now I understand how that works now, but at the time, how is that possible? And for the guy to say, when I got there, I was convinced he was going to tell me to get out of here because I had no money. He says, well, no gamblers have money, so I expect you to work tomorrow. So I go lie about my experience and get a job waiting tables the next day. And so
which was impossible, by the way.
Yeah. And when I went in there, I was expecting, the guy to say, he asked me, he said, you have any server experience? I said, yeah, I worked for Chili's many years ago. I was in college. He said, what system do they have? I don't even know what that meant. I go, I'm sure it's outdated. I learned yours pretty easily. I learned theirs pretty quickly. And it was simple. Put in your number and put in the order. It's basic, Right. And I learned that. And, as time went on, we did pretty good. And the guy, they all came to love me. I had a good personality. Customers loved me. And one day I was asking, I said, do you realize I had zero experience? None. And he goes, I thought that for a while. He said, but you covered it really well. So you do a great job. But I didn't even know the terms. I'm like, I don't even know what we're doing here, but it was, it worked out. And, those actually made some friends. They were part of that networking in the beginning. I made people that made cool friends that a lot of them had some issues going on, but I was able to connect with them and not to be involved in their issues. And I used that as a stepping stone to the next level, which led to the next level, which led to the next. And none of it ever was clear. When I say it, there was always a next step. I wasn't feeling it at all. I didn't believe there could be enough next step.
Point.
Like this chain of events that have me sitting at my desk in my office at home right now. That chain of events is impossible. It's not. You've heard the entire story multiple times, but if somebody didn't witness it, you've witnessed a lot of this back end stuff and people along the way. It really seems ridiculous how this all came together. It really did, but it all arrived when it needed to arrive.
And when it arrived, each step of the way, you said, well, that next step is not possible. That's the interesting thing about this, because that's what you end up doing. And I did the same thing. Every step along the way, I wanted to believe it. There was a part of me that wanted to believe it, but there was also that practical side that said, this is insane. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And somehow I just was looking for it anyway. I'm not even sure how I did it, to be honest.
Well, but then you get to a point like now for me, I have no idea I don't care what's going to happen. I say that in a cool way. I know that it's going to be awesome. In fact, I'm not even shocked anymore. It's just going to happen. I'm not shocked. I don't know what this, I've moved out of my home. I'm in a temporary place right now, beautiful temporary place. I have no clue what's next, and I don't care. It will be so obvious when it's time.
Yeah, that's a good point. It will be obvious. You don't believe it early stages, but after a while you begin to realize, okay, yeah, something's going to happen, and it will be obvious. And when it happens, I'll say, oh, yeah, okay.
People like, well, somebody said, well, don't you know what your plan is next? And I go, no, I can, first of all, I can keep staying here. There's nothing wrong with where I live. It's beautiful. I actually saw another townhome in the same area. They're brand new. They have these elevators. I like the idea of having my own elevator. I'm not saying I'll stay here for that, but I could see myself just enjoying that elevator a lot. So I put that on my list of maybe an elevator where I live next, my own private elevator. That's pretty cool. Never had one of those.
All right.
But whether that happens or not, none of it matters. I'll be at the right place at the right time, in the right situation. The right people will show up because it's on cruise control now. I spend a lot of time, and you just don't worry about it. And people said that would drive me crazy. I said, this lease where I'm at runs out in February of next year. I'll start putting some attention to it in January.
January, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll think about it. But until then, I'm here and comfortable. Or something comes along tomorrow, and I just move there and just pay off the lease here. It doesn't matter. Either way. But no matter what happens, I'm prepared for it. But along the way, the more you do this, the more you're in tune with it. Whether it's the law of proximity, law of attraction, when you quit fighting it's amazing. And I'm not critical. We say I fought it forever. So
me too.
Yeah. So I'm not in any way saying, oh, it's so easy. But once you get here, it really is. It's like ridiculously easy.
What I found is that over time, there was no one defining moment for me. There was no tipping point that said, oh yeah, that's where it all happened. There was nothing like that for me. What there was a slow, gradual transition that occurred over time. And eventually, I don't even know where it was. Eventually, I realized that, you know what, this keeps working. And I didn't fully believe it either. But I realized it enough that, again, it was transitional, right? The whole thing was an ongoing transition. And I think even to this day, it's still ongoing. The belief system part is ongoing. The buying into it part. I find myself a little more believing in it, a little more recognizing, wow, it just keeps working. It just keeps playing out. I didn't expect any of it. The way it's played out is certainly not what I had in mind, but it keeps playing out, and it keeps playing out well over and over again. One of these days I may actually believe it.
I mean, you from where we started to where you are now is amazing. You understand it. You still, within my belief system, once you can convince me so many times, and the constant reminders. And then when I realized, because I spent a lot of energy trying to do it right for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Me too. And that was the exact opposite of what I needed to do. I just, And so when you realize it's perfect for my brain, because I don't focus on anything too long, just put it in there, boom, it'll show up at some point, keep going. Remember the vision board. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. It's not critical of anybody does. It's
no.
Yeah, but I don't need that. I just get a general idea of like, here's some ideas. Like something tells me now that I discover you can get an elevator in your home, my next home will have an elevator. I believe that.
I believe it will too.
Yeah. Just so I want to have an elevator. I don't know why, but I want an elevator.
I can hardly wait to find out what your next home is going to be and how many floors it's going to have the elevator going to and all that stuff. Well,
if you have an elevator, it's got to be at least 4 floors in my mind. So
okay. All right. Well, that gives us a clue. That's good.
Yeah, it has to be 4 floors. It doesn't make any sense for 2 floors.
It's kind of silly for 2, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm looking forward to observing that story from afar while I observe my own story up close. And doing what we do here where we share those stories. So thank you for continuing to share those stories with me.
Well, definitely. I really appreciate the flexibility of the topic. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. And we only manifested the word manifest once at the beginning. That was it.
Yeah. We stayed away from that. So we are trying to ban that word for a little while.
There we go. All right. So I think you said 2 months. That's 1 down. So we've got 7 more to go. We're okay. We're on track. That's good. So thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.